لا إله إلا الله. Now I'm caught inside. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and we are back. We've just spoken to Ayub Dadabai in Jerusalem, getting a sense of what's currently taking place there, the effect of the airstrikes on Iran and on Tel Aviv as well, on parts of Israel, on the civilians in Palestine, in Jerusalem, and just to try and navigate what this may mean for people who want to travel to that region. We now bring things much closer to home and take things much further back into time, to the early arrival of Muslims at the Cape of South Africa, the Cape of Good Hope, and what Tuan Guru described as the Cape of Sorrows. And so we'd love to take listeners back to a time where Islam was not a thriving faith that one could profess publicly and one could adorn the clothing of and live freely, but to a time where this freedom to do so was actually curtailed by the colonial powers at the time, the Dutch East India Company and its agents, and for reasons that we'll delve into shortly. We have with us seasoned author, journalist Shafiq Morton, Uncle Shafiq, Puta Shafiq, Brother Shafiq, somebody that is dedicated his time to not only being present during the apartheid struggle, writing narratives on the struggle and using the journalistic tools that he has to deepen our understanding of that, and those things now become part of the national archive of history for us today. But he's written on a range of topics, he's been to a range of places, and we are going to speak to Uncle Shafiq now about some of the highlights of that media journey, but bringing it all back home actually to his latest published works on the Kramats at the Cape, which is effectively why we are here, the Circle of the Saints, a history of the Kramats at the Cape. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, Uncle Shafiq.
Welcome, Shakeel, and honored to be with you, and apologies for the lack of in-person presence, but I got out-Googled by Google this afternoon, unfortunately.
No worries. Unfortunately, we can't Google the reason why it didn't take place, and we have to just run with it and exercise some patience. Unfortunately, I can't see you, which makes me sad, but nonetheless, at least we can speak the way we are currently, and I hope that you're doing well.
Alhamdulillah, alhamdulillah.
So, Uncle Shafiq, without going too far back, we don't have all the answers, obviously, as researchers, as people that love history and people that hope to propel the past into the future and take with us the values that we've learned. Some things will never be maybe revealed to us in our lifetimes, but insofar as the archives are concerned, insofar as praying and asking Allah for openings is concerned, you've managed to publish a book recently about the ulama and the awliya and the salihin that used to live at the Cape, and for reasons that maybe you can tell us quite shortly, and just about some of their lives and how they end up meeting their deaths and the state of their places of burial today and what that means for a community. And what are some of the motivating factors that led to the writing and the publishing of this work? And I know that Awqaf South Africa has something to do with that, which perhaps you can tell us about as well. And as you introduce us to this idea of the Circle of the Saints.
Shakeel, shukran for that. Awqaf South Africa commissioned the work, and they've got a project that's called Leaders and Legacies. And the idea of the project is to try and bring to the fore community history and local history, to honor people who've done great things for community, leaders, and people who've actually set legacies. And Awqaf has published more than 40 publications in that particular line of Leaders and Legacies. And this is my third project with Awqaf. The first one was the book about Tuan Guru, from the Spice Islands to the Cape, the life and times of Tuan Guru. The second one was Shah Abu Bakr Effendi, a book about him being sent here by the Turkish Khalifa. And the final one, Circle of the Saints, the stories of the Kramats at the Cape. And the reason it's called the Circles of the Saints is because it was said that sometime during his life, Tuan Guru told his people, serve your masters, for one day you will be liberated and you will be protected by a circle of Kramats from fire, famine, etc., etc. And this was reported in the Cape Times of 1929 when a researcher was talking to a descendant of the family. So the circle is not a literal one. It's actually more of a metaphor than anything else. But it's a very nice way of remembering the Awliya at the Cape, who, in a sense, are very protective of the community.
When we speak about the awliya, perhaps one things of the friends of Allah and the protectors of the deen and so on. Can Uncle Shafiq just maybe give the listeners a bit of insight into the concept of the awliya and the Quranic reference to the awliya, and perhaps how that translates to a history of the making of South Africa at the Cape, the making of Islam in South Africa, rather.
No, that's a good question. I mean, in terms of spirituality, you get the Anbiya, the prophets, who are regarded as masoom or faultless. Then you could say you get a second layer of salih people, holy people, the awliya, who technically are regarded as the friends of Allah. And the Quran, for example, has a verse where it says that they don't grieve and nor do they fear. And it also refers to the shuhada, the shaheeds as well. There's also a hadith which is regarded as sound, extremely sound, mutawatir, where Nabi Muhammad said that he who harms a wali of mine, a friend of Allah, he declares war against me. Now, that's Allah wa ta'ala basically saying that. So it indicates to us that people do the best of work in the sight of Allah, for the sake of Allah, enjoy a very high spiritual status. One of the things that some awliya have the capacity to do is what we call karama, which are miraculous happenings. A prophet performs, they call it mu'ajizat, which is miracles, but on a lower level, a wali can do things that we regard as miraculous, but they are only allowed to do these things when Allah decrees it so. But we don't look at awliya for the karama. We look at awliya because of their closeness to Allah through their taqwa, through the iman, through their courage, their bravery, their sacrifice, their compassion, and the love of educating other human beings.
So we obviously would like to hone in and focus on particularly the awliya at the Cape and why this book was written, right? There's many stories in there. There are many luminaries that have been mentioned, and much that one can use to actually not close a book for a few days. If you're trying to get back into reading, I highly recommend this book. For the mere fact that you literally won't put it down until it's done. But if there's anything that you'd like to highlight from these books, from this particular work, Uncle Shafiq, which would be maybe the three salient stories that comes to your mind when reflecting on your journey to research, your journey to put and compile and eventually publish this work, and some of the stories that you perhaps heard that led to the writing thereof?
Oh, wow. But first of all, Shakeel, let me just say that there is a special barakah at the Cape, and I say this with respect to everywhere else in South Africa. And the reason is quite simple, and the fact is that in the writing of this book, there were 7 people in the book are fully authenticated Sayyids. In other words, fully authenticated descendants of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Like Sheikh Yusuf of Makassar, for example, is a Sayyid. Tuan Guru is a Sayyid. Sheikh Abu Bakr Effendi was a Sayyid. And it goes on and on and on, our most prominent personalities. So they carried with them, you could say, the DNA of the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him. And these are the people that are in our soil. But if I look at the stories, it's really difficult. I think the story of Sheikh Yusuf of Makassar is a deeply moving one, because Sheikh Yusuf of Makassar is an extraordinary character. He, for example, traveled for 26 years around the Muslim world in search of ilm, in search of knowledge. And he went to Aceh, he went to India, He went to Damascus, he went to Mecca, to Medina, and he also went to Yemen, and then he also went to Anatolia in Turkey. Very few people knew that Sheikh Yusuf even traveled as far as Turkey in search of knowledge. And the fact that he's called Taj al-Halwatiya, the crown of the Halwatiya Sufi order, is an honor that's not given to very many people. And apart from that, Sheikh Yusuf of Makassar was allowed to lecture in the Haram in Mecca. So by the time he came back to Indonesia, to Banten, he was already a world figure in terms of being a scholar. And even when he was exiled to Ceylon or Sri Lanka, he was exiled twice and then from Sri Lanka to the Cape. Even in Sri Lanka, wherever he went, people would try and follow him around. It was a big problem for the Dutch because he was a world figure. He was one of the top ulama of his time in the Indonesian archipelago. He's a giant. He was an absolute giant. And the story of Sheikh Yusuf coming to the Cape, and this is something which has been related by so many people, the Voetboeg, the ship which he's on, runs out of drinking water. Now, if you run out of drinking water when you're at sea and you still have many days or weeks before you can reach the nearest port, you're going to die. Because the average human being cannot last without water in a hot climate for longer than 4 to 5 days. So the members of the ship were getting very scared, so they told the captain, who was Martin de Yucht, go and talk to this holy man. Sheikh Yusuf lifted his hands in dua, and he said, lower me down into the water. He dips his ankle into the seawater, and the sailors fill their buckets, and the water is fresh enough to drink. And the story that makes it so profound is that orally, this is not in the archives, I was told by various people that some of that crew on the ship were so impressed by Sheikh Yusuf that some of them even became Muslim. I mean, I can talk about the sufferings of September van Boogies, for example, who was very unfairly and unjustly accused of supporting some slaves who had escaped and being part of them murdering some people. And September van Boogies was innocent. But he was deemed guilty by association because the escaped slaves had gone to September van Boogies and asked him for what we call in the Cape azimats, or a piece of paper on which you write Quranic ayat for protection, that kind of stuff.
Nice.
And these things were caught on these slaves who were captured, and eventually the Dutch East India Company captured September van Boogies. Now, September van Boogies did not say anything when he was interrogated, and they put him onto the wheel. Now, the wheel, it was a piece of wood on which basically slaves were crucified. And what the colonizers would do is they would get an iron bar and they would break your bones one by one. And if you were lucky, they would smash you across your chest so you'd have a heart attack and you would die. September van Boogies, they left him, they didn't give the final blow, they left him to die. But what shocked the Dutch was he didn't say one word. He didn't cry out in pain. All he said was, La ilaha illallah, La ilaha illallah, La ilaha illallah. And the Dutch were absolutely shocked. I couldn't believe it. And that's just the story of September van Boogies, which also indicates to us what our forefathers at the Cape had to go through to protect deen and to protect religion and to protect the justice and truth.
Indeed, La ilaha illallah, Muhammad Rasulullah. And with that, and with that in mind, and with that affirmation in mind, we take a short break, and when we come back, we'll continue to speak to Uncle Shafiq about the Circle of the Saints, a recently published book on the stories of the Kramats at the Cape, and how this relates not only to the archives and history and stories that were, but also how this affects our lives today and what lessons we can draw from it after the break. Stay tuned.
The Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, said, use the black seed, for indeed it is a cure for every disease except death. This Ramadan, honor that guidance. Tip Black Seed supports your blood sugar during fasting, boosts immunity, sustains your energy from suhoor to iftar. Available at leading pharmacies. Tip Black Seed, your golden drop every day.
Imagine fasting and not knowing you'll have something to eat at Iftar. This is a sad reality for thousands of new and indigenous Muslims in Southern Africa. Each Ramadan, for over 20 years, the Islamic Dawah movement has been providing Iftar meals in over 50 township masjids. All it takes is 30 Rand per meal. 30 Rand provides an Iftar meal for a fasting person. Your help would make a world of a difference. Call IDM on 031 304 6883 or visit idmsa.org to donate. IDM, taking Islam to as many hearts and homes as possible.
When the perfect blend of stylish decor, exquisite halal cuisine, and warm hospitality come together, it could only mean Al Bayt Lodge, your true home away from home. Al Bayt is the ideal heaven for families, business people, and tourists with its 4-star family rooms and other luxurious facilities. Conveniently situated close to Port Elizabeth Airport, the beach, and other amenities, your stay will be truly unforgettable as you'll be taking home lasting memories of the warm hospitality, the serenity and tranquility that Al Bayt has to offer. For reservations, call 041 583 6415 or visit www.albaytlodge.co.za.
Zakat is more than just charity. It is a duty, a trust, and a means to uplift those in need. For over 40 years, Islamic Relief has been distributing zakat through a policy that strictly complies with Sharia guidelines, endorsed by qualified scholars, and ensures it reaches only those who are eligible. Your zakat is our amana. Donate now to Islamic Relief.
Kids these days are smart, and when you're competing for their attention against their smartphones, you need to make smart choices, like using Sunfoil triple refined pure sunflower oil in every meal you make. It's naturally cholesterol-free and approved by the Heart and Stroke Foundation as part of a balanced eating plan. So whether you're cooking, frying, or baking, you get the great tasting results that'll get their attention faster than the latest app. And if that doesn't work, change the Wi-Fi password. Sunfoil. Now we're cooking.
With so many investment options today, it's only natural that you might feel a little confused which route to take. Should I buy shares or should I invest in gold bullion? Randery Jewelers now brings you the Zahab coin, an alternative to the Kruger Rand. The Zahab coin, a solid wealth protector in its purest form of 24-karat gold, is the safest way to protect your wealth. So don't just sit there and watch your paper money depreciate. Change to gold. Call Randery Jewelers now at 031 202 4701 or visit www.rjcoin.co.za. Situated at 151 Essenwood Road, Musgrave, Durban. Randery Jewelers, the family name you can trust.
Assalamu alaikum, and we are back to speak to Uncle Shafiq Morton, author of The Circle of the Saints, stories of the Kramats at the Cape. And Uncle Shafiq was just telling us about the manner in which the exiles that were the leaders effectively of our earliest Muslim community at the Cape how they were treated by the Dutch East India Company and the authorities at the time when found to be on the other side of the law. And many of them relied solely on Allah and perhaps were spared the pangs that one may think that they would have endured in meeting their Creator. Uncle Shafiq, some further lessons that we can elucidate and find in their lives, for relevance to our lifestyles today. I mean, we live extremely disconnected lives. When I say disconnected, I mean we're very connected. We have in our phones and Wi-Fi and Bluetooth and all these things, but disconnected from nature, disconnected from the message, and disconnected from struggle. And I say this from a perspective of privilege because there are many people listening and in our country that do struggle. But I think that none of us can relate to the brutality that the early Muslims were met with under slavery and under those harsh conditions. What sort of lessons have you drawn, and that maybe that readers and listeners alike can draw from the lives of the early ulama and awliya of the Cape for our own benefit today as we spend time in Ramadan trying to find that moments of solitude with Allah, trying to find meaning in the Quran, and trying to make better sense of our lives and our purposes?
Yeah, it's a beautiful question, Shakeel. I think some of the biggest lessons that I learned is that Allah is everywhere. Whether you are in Indonesia, whether you're at the tip of Cape Town, and if you have sabr, or if you have patience in the same way that Rasulullah ﷺ did during the times of the Treaty of Hudaybiyah, it's amazing what you can achieve just with sabr. And I use the word sabr with great caution. Let me give you some practical examples. Tuan Guru arrives in 1780. He is a Sayyid, he is a scholar, he's an Imam, and he's a diplomat. He's a highly ranked official from the Moluccas, the Spice Islands from Tidore, and he's been captured and taken to Batavia and sent in a sinking ship to the foot of Africa. And he arrives at the Cape, and the Dutch have lost his papers, so they just post him off to Robben Island. On Robben Island, he immediately sees the suffering and the sad state of the convicts that are there and of the exiles that have been sent there. And people were exiled to the Cape for resisting Dutch colonialism during the time of the Dutch East India Company. And Tuan Guru, who is a scholar, Hafiz al-Quran, makes a decision. He could either try and fight the Dutch with a sword, which meant he would last for 5 minutes, or he could fight with Iman and Deen and education, which means he could set a legacy. So he decides, how can I do it? He writes Quran from memory. The reason he wrote the Quran was because he knew and he felt that the slaves, the convicts, and the underclass at the Cape needed a Quran, that what was going to comfort them first and foremost was the Quran. And he wrote 5 Qurans actually from memory while he was in exile. So that was his starting point. Tuan Guru eventually ends up on the mainland, and he ends up he comes back to the mainland in 1782. From 1782 until 1786, he starts writing a book called the Marifa. And in it, he writes about Tawheed, and from memory, he writes the book of Imam As-Sunusi. Then he writes all the dhikrs that can be used for protection against oppressors. Then he has du'as, he has hadith, lessons, seerah. All this is in this book that he writes from memory of more than 600 pages. 1786, he's sent back to the island again. And there again, he sees the value of the Quran and how it can uplift and help people. He comes back to the mainland, and in 1793, he realizes people need education. So he starts the first madrasa at the Cape. And this is where we learn the lessons. The madrasa was inclusive. Anybody could go to it. Islam, which was taught by Tuan Guru and practiced at the Cape, was compassionate. And the biggest thing, it was inclusive. Anybody and everybody was welcome, particularly amongst the slave underclass. And as a result of this patience of Tuan Guru, he started to actually create an urban community that came to be known as Cape Malays, which is a misnomer, but is actually basically the Cape Muslim community. So the lesson that we take from that, especially for today, is that we have to be compassionate, inclusive of all peoples. It doesn't matter who they are. And the third one is education, education, and education. As Muslims, it's our responsibility to educate others. And when we are educated, to educate other people. And this is the example of Medina, where the Al-Ansar adopted the Muhajirun, and they were hospitable to each other, gave them a home. And Rasulullah in Medina told the educated people to teach the uneducated people. So there's just so many lessons that come out of it. I could go on for a very long time. But at the end of the day, I think the biggest message of all, there is always hope. And part of sabr is hope. There's always hope. And we should never, ever give up on that.
And I mean, I think that when one breaks down the ultimate message is that the Quran, in the month of the Quran is the saving grace for people that are hopeless and that are forlorn. And that we should all strive to look to it as a guide at all times and not beautify the worlds with it, but actually gain understanding. With regards to the Kramats again, of course, there's a lot of tradition and a lot of understanding about where the ulama and awliya were buried, and what these places hold significance for the people of today, insofar as how these areas are respected and visited and so on. But what story stands out for you in terms of some of the forgotten Kramats that maybe emerged later on through intervention, farm happenings and occurrences that took place, and some strange occurrences that have happened that led to people discovering the burial places of some of our awliya that of course were maybe forgotten for decades or even a century or more before being discovered again, that maybe can allow us to ponder upon one day perhaps that our own burial places may not be marked, and that we might be forgotten to the physical realm, but that perhaps our efforts will ring through the centuries and decades that come after our lives have passed.
Yeah, Shakeel, I mean, awliya are incredible people. And at the beginning of the interview, I said that the Anbiya are Masoom. An awliya or wali is not Masoom, and wali is human. But they do have incredible characteristics, and they are imbued with spiritual powers because they are so close to their creator. So many examples. There's a Said Abdul Basir who's buried above Camps Bay in Cape Town. And I happen to know the family of the person who discovered the Kramat. And the story is there was a mason called Siraj, they call him Sirai, and he used to cut rock from the mountain to build walls. He was a stonemason. And one day he was cutting the rock, and a figure appeared out of the rock with wearing a thobe and a turban and all that, and told him that this is my burial place. And he got such a shock that he ran home. He went back again, and the figure appeared again, if I remember correctly. And then he thought, but hang on a minute, this is very strange. He was a very pious man, and then he went to a scholar, and the scholar said, no, these are the signs of an awliya. This person is telling you that this is where they are buried. So that is just an example, and this happened in the 1980s, by the way. That's quite recently. This is how these things happen. Now, some people say it's fairy stories. Well, if you experience these things, they're not fairy stories. They are very real. Sheikh Abdul Muttalib in Constantia, and there are so many graves in Constantia that somebody saw a man. The farm workers used to see a man in white at the gate every Friday, and they followed the man, and he climbed into the earth. That was his grave. And at the same spot, the farm workers had a cart. The cart would not go over that particular place where the grave was on Fridays. Mm-hmm. There are just so many stories like that. The story of Sheikh Nur al-Mubin of Oudekraal, where it said, and this is, you can take it or leave it, people say he walked across the water to escape from Robben Island, to hide out in the mountain. In the book, I give three theories. The possibility of swimming across, which is highly possible, or stealing a boat, which happened once or twice on Robben Island for people to escape. But the fact that people believed that this man was capable of this speaks to the fact that during his time he must have had very special personality and special characteristics and a lot of spiritual power. I mean, as I say, I could go on and on. There are just so many stories at the Cape of how these people manifest themselves. And of course, I have to emphasize, nobody worships the awliya. They are respected, and wherever they are regarded as places of barakah. So nobody goes there to worship these people. I mean, you cannot do that. I mean, that's unacceptable. But nonetheless, the awliya of Allah have incredible powers, it seems. And one thing that struck me so profoundly in writing the book, which was emotionally a very, very demanding process, again, I've already said it, was the compassion of these people, the way they cared about others, and their adherence to Sharia. All of our great teachers at the Cape, Tuan Guru, Sheikh Abu Bakr Effendi, Sheikh Yusuf, Sheikh Muhammad Saleh Hendricks, and so many others, all of them would always say Sharia comes before everything else. In fact, some of them would even say that Sharia is Sufism, because all of them were Sufis. And that is a theme that comes through very strongly in the book. But basically, awliya become because of the love that Allah has for them and the love they have for Allah. It's the most simple way of explaining it. And at the Cape. And I think in South Africa, actually, we're blessed with a lot of awliya. I believe there are some awliya in Gauteng, and of course there are awliya as well in KZN. They're everywhere. And they are the blessings of mankind, one could say.
And to use a reference from a marathon, I feel that the story ends and the book ends with the demise of Imam Abdullah Harun, and because the life in which he lived, although I was not alive at the time, we can still relate more to the apartheid era than we can maybe to slavery or to colonialism. And so to have a figure that may or may not be regarded as of the awliya, but was definitely is regarded as a shaheed among our people, and the manner in which he passed away in detention, and the mystery around that, which of course inquests have been made and finalized and brought to the light. But for that tangible example to be in our time and made manifest in our newspapers and made public for us to know, and for a person like us, like Imam Abdullah Harun, for his story to be told, I think it's so important when young people like myself, like our colleagues, our friends, look for examples as to how to navigate the changing world we live in, the geopolitical sphere we live in, and just how local and foreign politics play at the heartstrings of Muslims, and beg the question as to what we are going to do and the answers that we are going to arrive at by delving and asking Allah and living righteous lives the way that these men and women have lived. So what would in closing be some of the remarks that you would like to make for this generation coming up now, navigating people that actually lived Islam, lived the Quran, made dhikr, spent time in seclusion, but also spent time fighting quite literally with their bare hands the injustice that they were faced with, and for us that live in relative comfort, how to still be part of the solution in fighting oppression everywhere we find it, and in the hopes of drawing a lesson from the awliya at the time.
Look, I mean, obviously in fighting oppression, we know the three creeds of it, as it were. You know, you can condemn in your heart, you can condemn with your mouth, and you can actually take action and become an activist. You just mentioned the life and times of Imam Abdullah Harun. I discovered a side of Imam Harun, and I can remember I was alive when he was alive, and I can remember the earthquake of 1969. On the night he was buried, the earth shook. There was an earthquake. And the place that was affected the most was Tilbach, where one of his torturers actually came from. So that is amazing. And the coincidence, I mean, the Western Cape is not known for earth tremors. I mean, I've been on the earth for 70 years, and I can only remember 2 or 3, and the biggest one was when Imam Harun died. But Imam Harun's example is what sets us apart. I mean, number one, he was a man of integrity. He studied in Makkah under for a few years under Sayyid Alawi al-Maliki, and he had to come home because of the Second World War. But he was allowed to study by the aunt that looked after him. If he became an alim, he was not to accept 1 cent, not to accept 1 cent for the duties he would perform as a sheikh or an alim. So when he was the sheikh of Stegman Road in Claremont in Cape Town, he didn't accept payment as an imam. He did it for free. for the love of Allah, and he worked for Wilson Roundtree as a representative of the sweet company. The other thing about Imam Harun was he was completely attached to the Quran, and his son Muhammad told me wherever he went with his father, Imam Harun would be reciting Quran in the car. And Imam Harun also would go into the townships and he would give the children sweets. There again, kindness, compassion, dawah. Imam Harun also was a man of sabr, because from the 1940s, the late 1940s, he fasted every Monday and every Thursday without fail, his whole life until the day he died. And he also was motivated by the fact that the Quran talks about justice. And in spite of his fears, and you must remember that Imam Harun, like all of the other awliya, they worked in a climate of fear. In spite of his fears, Imam Harun kept focus. He never lost his focus on what justice was. And his way of making sure that justice was applied was by helping other people and showing the morality of Islam and the kindness and compassion of Islam. And Imam Harun achieved such a high status by just sticking to values that after he died, said Abdul Qadir Naqshbandi, who was an imam in Weinberg, had a dream of Imam Harun with another figure coming down over the Kaaba in a cloud and greeting Said Abdul Qadir and embracing him and telling him that people in South Africa should recite the Qasida Munfarija, which is a very, very powerful dua which is read with a galloping rhythm. And Munfarija has a lot of barakah, but it's also a wall against depression. So those are the life and times of Imam Abdullah Harun, but he was an inspiration in the sense of Ubuntu. We are who we are through others. And as Muslims, what we need to do is we need to understand our neighbors, no matter whom they may be, whether it's a white Afrikaner, whether it's somebody from Venda, somebody from the Transkei, somebody from Bangladesh or Malawi or wherever else. We have to follow the example of Tan Guru and be inclusive and be compassionate. We need to build the Ummah, and the Ummah is built by all of us getting along together despite the differences that we may have. Because at the end of the day, we all say, La ilaha illallah Muhammadur Rasulullah. It's as simple as that.
Uncle Shafiq, I think that was beautifully said, and unfortunately going to have to leave it there for now, but it is only a tip of the iceberg of the stories of the Kramats at the Cape and the lives that they lived and the lives that we might want to live in the example that they've left for us. They would have learned from the stories of the Quran. They would have drawn from the Sahaba. They would have drawn from that rich history and then applied it to the lives that they actually lived and the challenges that they were actually faced with, in the same way that we are faced with challenges today, and the manner in which we can draw examples from them. We thank you for your time, and we look forward to the Gauteng book launches as well, which I'm told take place in Pretoria on the 3rd of April and Johannesburg on the 4th of April. And if you haven't yet, get your hands on the book and find yourself inspired throughout this month of Ramadan as you ponder on the lives of the awliya. Uncle Shafiq, shukran. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum salam. It's been a pleasure.
When we come back, we'll be speaking to Muhammad Groenewald about the Burhanul Islam movement in Hoekap in the Cape, as well as a very interesting tradition of the red fez, the Ottoman fez that was popular in all of the country at the time in South Africa, especially at the Cape as well, and the revival of the making of the fez and the adorning of the fez for the coming Eid, inshallah. That will be after the break.